Good evening. It's Monday. Do you want to know how my afternoon went? Well, I had an appointment, but because I'm still living in the times of COVID, I didn't realise it was in Glasgow. So that didn't help when I only had 15 minutes to get there, because I don't like speeding anyway, and I'm not a physicist, so I don't know how to break the time speed barrier or whatever it is. So that was good. Don't make appointments in Glasgow and imagine that people don't actually physically meet each other anymore, because apparently they do. Who knew? I know, I get it. A lot of people have been at work. I've been at work. It's just to do a lot of it in my home. Just saying, I didn't realise that you actually weren't face to face with certain people anymore, particularly when it's quite a distance away. I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but that was my Monday. How was your Monday? Also, had writer's block. Yeah, brain just has been blocked. So if today there's just a moment where I just zone out, just look blankly at you, you'll know that this is something that I've been enduring through the day. And I've made that kind of conscious effort to say to myself, going to be fine tomorrow. So if any of you are having one of those days, just use a bit of my advice. Just go, be fine tomorrow. Arguably, you could also say, well, that's one day closer to the deadline, which arguably could not be a good thing. But I'm just going with the positive, reframing. That's how to do it. How are you all? I know that some of you are having a bit of a crappy time because you've been in touch with me. I know that some of you are feeling that you're a bit flat at the moment. Bit of a weird time, isn't it? We've gone from the dark nights to the light days, and now a lot of us are thinking about summer holidays, aren't we? And then we're realising we actually can't afford them. Everything's gone sky high. It's going to have to be camping and probably in the garden. Is that just me? Might just be me. I'll get on with the questions, and for anybody who's new and is like, why is she going on about irrelevant things for mental health? It's just so that people can join, just filling in a little bit in between starting the questions, so don't judge me. Although some people do come here specifically to judge me, in which case I'm at peace with that. Go ahead and judge. What you can do if you are new here and you want to get me to answer a question, if you go on Facebook, that's probably the easiest, because you can either do it on a private message or you can do it in the actual chat. But on any platform, if you're quite happy to have it openly discussed, i.e. your name is on there or your Twitter handle, just type some words in. Pete will let me know and I'll answer it accordingly. There are some that I had to catch up with this week because clearly I wasn't here last week. So apologies for not being present. I tend not to miss my Mondays ever, but just occasionally when I have to be up at 3 o'clock in the morning, I do, because I wouldn't wake up and then I wouldn't work. Let's get on with the questions now. Lovely to see you all. Hi Emma, I'm really struggling with birth trauma. Okay. I had my second son 15 months after my first. The birth was completely unexpected. I went in at 37 weeks with reduced movements, and it ended up with an emergency C-section under general anaesthetic. I've since been diagnosed with PTSD and postnatal depression, finding life really hard. So there's a few different elements there, right? First of all, it could absolutely be that the postnatal depression is related to your trauma, or it could be separate. And that's really difficult when we're facing something like this, because you want to know what you're dealing with. And effectively, when it's all culminated at the same time, you're trying to think to yourself, well, if I get over the trauma, depression will be better, or if I get over the depression, will the trauma alleviate? And I guess the most important thing is to just say, look, whatever is the reality in that scenario, whether it's two separate issues or one compounded issue, it still feels the same. So I think that when you're dealing with a mental health issue, and certainly when we think about postnatal depression, we can additionalise that with chemical, hormonal issues. It's a big physiological change going through childbirth. And often people think that postnatal depression are things like not being able to bond with your baby or feeling exhausted all the time. And actually, a lot of those stereotypes are unhelpful, because with postnatal depression, often it's actually massive overprotectiveness. You don't really want anybody else near your child. You're not necessarily trusting the world around you because you feel that you've got the most precious little baby in the whole world. You don't want anybody to come near it. So there are all these myths around postnatal depression. But one of the things that we do know is a lot of it is to do with your physical self, the physical makeup. So it's not that you are facing a mental health crisis on that level. It's that you're feeling a mental health crisis, but a lot of it's to do with the physicality of it. So this is something that you can do a little work on when it comes down to nurturing the self, making sure that you're eating a really well-balanced diet. And I say that because processed food is the devil. Honestly, it is. That does not mean I do not occasionally like a vegan burger, slathered in probable chemicals that, if I really knew what they were, would drive me crazy just thinking about what I ate. But for the most part, processed food is terrible. And if you want any evidence of that, guys, I'm not just saying it from the position of trying to be in any way obnoxious or objectionable. I'm talking about, you can literally see where we started to advertise things like low-fat diets, and actually we see obesity go through the roof because of the fact that most food is processed by this point, and also we're selling high sugar content and not good fat content, because fat isn't actually that bad as long as it's good fat. So when I talk about good nutrition, I really mean about, if you want to tackle your mental health when it comes down to depression and anxiety, actually any mental health issue, full stop, because it's good for us per se, then non-processed, cut out the high sugars, get rid of the processed white foods, make sure you're eating a protein-rich diet, make sure that you're getting loads of fresh vegetables, and do everything organic if you can afford it. And I mean, I'm not talking about going out, I don't have to because I don't eat meat. I'm not talking about going out and buying ridiculously expensive food. There are things that you can do that are cheap. I get organic chickpeas and they're next to nothing. There's ways of feeding yourself that is going to really nurture your body and give you more strength and energy, which is what you want. But also, because of the fact that you're putting less chemicals in your body, you get a better result. Now, big food and big pharmaceuticals aren't going to tell you that, because they want you to spend a lot of money. And that means that somebody can always stand in and go, oh, well, there's some peer-reviewed studies here that say it's perfectly all right eating loads of sugar, or it's perfectly all right drinking loads of Coca-Cola. Believe what you want. I'm telling you from an experiential and a reality-based view, and from genuine experience, the more that you nurture your body in that way, the better it's going to be for you. So that's one thing when you're dealing with depression, postnatal or otherwise, because you want to help create the best environment for you to heal. And that's beginning with the self. Also, exercise. When you've got postnatal depression, it's probably the last thing you want to do, because when you're depressed, really getting out of bed can feel tortuous. And then add to that, you're looking after 2 children. That's really understandable. And I know, genuinely, I've been in the situation where I felt like it's almost impossible to do anything but just breathe. But even now, years down the line from my dad's passing, I'm still struggling to get back into a full routine of exercise, but I do exercise, whether it's walking or just activity. So try to do that as well, because that's really important. But let's put that to the side then. You're dealing with your nutritional, you're dealing with your physical. Now let's bring in the PTSD. You've had a horrific experience. And to go into hospital, you're carrying the most important person in the world in that moment, which is your baby. And then suddenly, all that nice control that you had in your head, you've done it before with your first one. Everything was going to go like clockwork because that's what you think. We don't tend to overanalyze or catastrophize in those situations. And then every single bit of control just gets ripped away from you. And suddenly your child's life is in danger, your life is potentially in danger, you have no opportunity to make choices over that situation, and you're ultimately putting your life in somebody else's hands. That is transformative, and it transcends reason as well. So you can logically say, well, actually what I did was I gave a qualified surgeon power because he knew more, or she knew more about me in that moment than I did. And that's a really sensible thing to do. So you elected in that way, when you reframe it, to give power to somebody who knew more than this you did about this situation. So you handed that power over, you got the job done, and you did a brilliant job. You've got your baby, they're fine, right? So if you look at it that way from a reframe perspective, wow, that's a pretty sensible thing that you did. But that's logic and that's reason. And whilst we want to take you from trauma into logic and reason, because that's of course what we want to do, we want to change that. I am traumatized. I felt like the world became my enemy. I could have died. My child could have died. I can't trust the world as it is anymore because everything's changed. That's the way that you're looking at it. That's the perspective you're looking at it right now. And that's because of that lack of control, that loss of control. And also ultimately the fact that physically things didn't happen how you wanted them to happen. But like I said, what needs to happen is you need to be brought over into the logic position, which is very rational and which says, wow, look at that. You can have a medical emergency whilst pregnant And you can still trust that there are people there who are going to make it perfectly all right, and you're going to end up with a healthy human and also a healthy body, yours. And by transitioning from the emotional state to the de-traumatized rational state, you get the shift that's required. But how that's going to happen, it comes down to lots of different reasons. So, for example, if you can afford a little bit of therapy and you want to just fast track this, shall we say, maybe you could pay for something like EMDR. EMDR is really good at reprocessing trauma. And in circumstances like this, where you've got something really definitive and you can kind of go, that is where my trauma really began, that's really useful in EMDR, because they can help you reprocess and desensitize your feelings around that, because you have something very concrete to do that with. Now, again, not everybody's got 90 quid for an hour and 6 sessions of that, or whatever is required. But if you have, that's certainly a strategy that I would look at. If you haven't, then hopefully you'll get on a waiting list. You'll be on a waiting list for EMDR with your GP, who can refer you to your trust to do that, because that will help. But like I said, one of the big things that I'd suggest to you, apart from the medical stuff that I've talked about, i.e. making sure that you have some empathy with the fact you've been through a real medical experience, and there's going to be hormonal changes because of the baby, there's going to be physical changes because of what happened to you during that experience. Aside from that, when it comes down to looking after the body, looking after your nurture, looking after your exercise, do some mindful practice, practice meditation, allow yourself to really connect with your body again. It's not your enemy. In fact, it is awesome. Your body can go through something highly traumatic and it heals. Your mind might not have healed yet, but just don't forget to stand in awe of what your body has achieved. You've birthed 2 kids in a very short amount of time. You've survived something really terrifying, and you've healed in that respect physically. That's awesome. Like, see yourself through that mirror, because if you do, it starts to just incrementally shift the attention that you have on the trauma into the attention that you have on the actual reality of surviving it. And also, that to some degree can start making you feeling more empowered about your situation and position. And when we feel more empowered, which is like, oh, actually, you know what? That was a really bad event, but I've had all these years, and all these years that's been probably the one that stood out to me more than anything. And look at how many other days there have been. So what we do, we start taking like fragments of detail of our lives and building them into a picture where the reality of the picture is more profound and more powerful than the picture of the trauma that right now feels consuming. You can do that by doing some of the work that I've just been talking about there, by vantaging that point, by looking and thinking, yeah, let's see it from a different point of view. Like, see it from your mum's point of view. Your mum will be like, wow, my daughter survived that. Wow, isn't it amazing? Isn't she amazing? See it from your partners. You're a warrior. You start seeing it from different perspectives, and people should do this with any kind of trauma. And it really helps to just position it slightly differently. When you do things like EMDR, or when you do trauma therapy, it's never about betraying that trauma. It's never about just saying, well, that wasn't useful, because every single thing that happens to us has some kind of purpose. You won't know it yet. It's too painful for you now, but it will, in the end, reflect something of importance and value. So you never want to lose the lessons in it. And things like EMDR, they don't make you lose them. You can still see the trauma, remember the trauma, but you don't feel it in that devastatingly impactful way. So the more that you can start doing what I was saying, like, see yourself from your child's eyes. You are a superhero. You are the all-seeing, all-knowing hero in the story. There is nothing your child wants more than for you to be exactly who you are. You are everything to them. See them in that eye. See those eyes, the way that they stare at you. View it that way. Anything that can help you to do that really, really helps to just, like I said, lessen the impact a little bit. So I do all of those things, but don't underestimate for 1 minute how powerful that experience has been for you. And like I said, the one thing that I always try to get across, and please don't think that I'm underestimating the impact of trauma. Believe me, I'm not underestimating it at all. But what I always try to do, and this is in every situation with clients and with myself, with my children, with my friends, is I always try to help people think about what they have learned about the self And very often, whilst you can say, well, I've learned that I can be depressed and that's scary, well, you know, you've learned that you can go through depression and it's awful, it's scary, it's exhausting, but you're going through it. It's an experience that will make you more empathetic, more sensitive, more understanding. You'll be a better parent because of your understanding of how it can be to feel that emotional discourse. Those things will have meaning in the end. It's like find the threads that are awakening you to different experiences, circumstances, and emotional deals, because that's how we learn and grow, and that's how we become more rounded human beings, which makes you a more rounded mother. Hi Emma, what would be the best way to tell our 10-year-old son, is that 10-year-old son? No. What would be the best way to tell our 10-year-old, we are having a baby, he doesn't want a sibling, so worried. I will buy the baby. No. Congratulations. Very congratulations. I might be a bit broody. I've been broody for a long time. So first of all, congratulations. Absolutely. Second of all, sensible 10-year-old, thinking the economy isn't brilliant at the moment. Inheriting everything is probably best for me. Maybe being a single child, I'll get all the best trainers. You know, it's pretty normal for young kids to think to themselves that they've got it good. Why would they want mum and dad to not focus all the attention on them? Fortunately, you shouldn't feel bad because you know that one day you will depart this earth, and hopefully many years before they depart this earth, and therefore you don't want them to be by themselves in that grief, or you know, you want them to feel that they've got somebody that they can turn to when they're in the hard times and you're otherwise indisposed, retired, maybe sunning yourself in Spain 6 months of the year. And that's what siblings are great for. The thing about telling your child is that you shouldn't feel that you're letting them down. You're not letting them down. You're the grown-up. You make decisions about what's right for your family life. And I think that, and don't get me wrong, I'm a compassionate parent. I teach compassionate parenting, which means no shouting, no hitting, always being able to communicate on a level with a child and being kind even when things are difficult, right? So I'm all of those things. But I think the modern parent has got so guilted into believing that they can damage their kids awfully by just saying the wrong thing to them, because there is a culture at the moment where nobody dares to offend anybody for fear that that offence will either ruin their life or ruin the person that they're talking to's life. It's like, that isn't healthy. Like, it's not a healthy mindset that we're growing up in. So you're feeling part of that because you're a loving, compassionate parent. You're a sensitive, empathic human being who wants to bring your child up knowing fully that they are loved beyond measure. But you clearly love them beyond measure. So they're being brought up that way. The fact that you have more love to give, because that's the great thing about children, there isn't a particular tap on the amount of love that you have. You can just keep giving it equally in boundless amounts. That's what you're about to do. And I think that when you tell your child, you tell them unapologetically and unashamedly, which is, we're having a baby brother or sister and mummy and daddy are really happy about this because it's going to make a really big addition to our family that's really special. And we really want you to have some responsibility in that. I always think that when you're getting a sibling to kind of come to the awareness that this isn't going to shift and change things too dramatically for them as far as love goes, it's almost bringing them into a, we feel that you're really responsible and you're going to teach this child how to be a really special sibling, and you're going to teach them how to grow, and you're going to have the energy that they're going to need to play football or go swimming with you, and, you know, make it fun. But most of all, like, if you tell your child and they have like a massive screaming fit and throw a truck at the door and tell you you're terrible parents, be like, okay, it's okay. They'll get over it. They'll be absolutely fine. And they'll have a pet lip for a few days and then they'll deal with it. And that's it. They'll deal with it. And the fact that your child feels that they're in a position to tell you what they want, sibling or otherwise, Well, it's kind of good to help them understand that they aren't in charge of your world. They're a kid. They need to be in charge of their world. And that's a good lesson for them to learn as well. So try to let that go. Don't let this amazing moment of joy be hampered by your fear for your child, because at the very worst, it will be a temporary moment where they feel a bit angry and sad, and you'll be able to replay that memory at their wedding just to remind everyone of what an arse they were when they were 10, and it will be a joyful memory that you all connect with. And no doubt at that wedding, their baby brother or sister will either be a flower girl or an usher, and will be proudly watching their elder sibling tie the knot, with you all there as a family being so grateful that that was a decision that you all took. So try to focus on that. A lot of the stuff I do when I'm dealing with conflictual experiences is I always future focus. And very often when you future focus, that moment of what you will be anticipating will occur, because logically it will. You suddenly have this overwhelming peace, and it's like, yeah, this isn't about the 10-year-old kid. This is about the 45-year-old adult who's struggling with a divorce, or has lost a job, or is feeling sad, and they pick up the phone and they ring the older sibling, or they pick up the phone and they ring the younger sibling. That's the power of what you're doing right now. You're manifesting a family, and it's going to be amazing. It's going to be amazing. And if it isn't, I will buy the baby. It's a joke before anybody sends that to an awarding body, eh? And McKenny's procuring babies online. There's always somebody, isn't there? You're always so energetic, Emma. How do you do it? Sport and healthy food. I mean, I'm quite balanced. I don't drink alcohol anymore very often. That was hard, because I think that alcohol was something quite fun. But I think as I've got older, I've realised that it's probably not that much point having things like alcohol in your diet. So that would be one thing that I do. I am quite energetic. No, I am quite energetic. I was going to try and think of her when I wasn't, but I am quite energetic. But I'm not somebody who stays up really, really late. Like 11:30 is like my latest, and I get up kind of the same time every single day. And I also think that food for me is always just being fuel. I know it sounds really sad to say that, but when I was younger, I've talked openly about the fact that I had an eating disorder when I was a kid. And people used to say, you'll always have an eating disorder, you'll always be anorexic, you'll always be bulimic, you'll always have this, you'll always have to eat in a way that reflects and respects that. And I was like, that sounds like a terrible idea. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to be normal. And I remember kind of really working on that and being like, food's just fuel. So I try to pick ultimately the best fuel that's possible. But like I said earlier on, listen, I'm not going to deny it. If I go out to a restaurant and there's like a massive vegan burger with some sweet potato fries, I'm definitely going to have it. I won't be able to eat all of it because, again, I'm a content person. I'm not an overeater, if that makes sense. So I never eat till I'm full. It's a bit of a tip for you out there. Don't know what it's like to feel full. Wouldn't want to. Contentment. Somewhere between the solar plexus and the throat. It's a good space. I'm getting told by my husband to say weights. Yes, I do. I have a love of kettlebells. And I also have a love of weights. But the point is, at the moment, I'm not as keyed in. I walk a lot. But in the last few weeks, I've kind of had a lot to do and I've not done as much. So I'm just trying to be authentic, Pete, and not just being like, yeah, I was in there before, just before coming on here. I was kettlebelling, I was slamming them around, I was everything. No, I wasn't. I was sat wondering what it would be like to have £20,000 to spend on a holiday. If any of you know what that's like, please leave me a message below. I imagine it's very nice.
Someone on Instagram just asked how I've got such perfect eyes.
Have I got such perfect eyes? My eyeliner, you mean?
Yeah.
It's just good lighting.
It's 41, she's sick of sunken eyes.
Oh, no. So, like, what is this? This is not mental health, but I'll answer it quickly. So, number one, get a really good concealer. Number one. Number two, on a serious note, I only know this because I've got friends in aesthetics. So, like, I do have quite sunken eyes, but at the end of the day, I've got good lighting, so you don't have to worry about it. But I was reading the other day that apparently you can have fillers put into your troughs. How do I know this? I don't know. There's fillers put into your troughs. Look it up. I think you have to have it done every like 18 months. Fillers put into your troughs and like gets rid of the dark circles completely if you have them. I know that now because I was looking at like eye creams, like because I have lines under my eyes, and I went on like all different things and it was like alternatives to, and I was like, no way, and they look amazing. That's what I'd say. I haven't had them though, although even though I've got like loads of lines all over my head and I've got the most expressionful face in the world, everyone still writes that I've got Botox, which is fine, and knock themselves out, but I actually don't. But not that I wouldn't, just I look like a killer clown if I have it done. Right, let's move on. There you go, Emma Kenny with her beauty and her health tips. Exercise. Come here next week. We may be doing star jumps and burpees. We'll never be doing burpees. They are created by the devil. Hi Emma, I'm struggling with my therapist at the moment and I'm not sure how to get through it. It's NHS and I know if I stop, I won't be given any more help as I had to appeal to get some anyway. God. I've got EUPD, so emotionally unstable personality disorder is what the person is saying now. And she seems surprised my emotions get in the way of therapy. And if I express how I'm feeling frustrated with the therapy, she accuses me of criticizing the therapy. I don't know what to say, not to upset her any advice. It's not your job to be concerned about your therapist's feelings. It is the absolute opposite. Listen, no practitioner is meant to sit in a chair and get abused. Of course not. There is a line that is drawn in the sand. That's not what I'm hearing from you. You know, I will consciously say, just in case people get confused about my sentiments in what I'm expressing, that if somebody is sat in a chair as a practitioner and their client is calling them an arsehole constantly and being threatening and suggesting that they are a useless piece of crap, that's not acceptable, right? Even then, a lot of us, shall we say, dyed-in-the-wool practitioners would be exploring what had triggered those feelings in that individual to such a point that they were struggling and needed to express that position, right? Because what is it that's going on in the room that makes that person feel so aggressive? Is it a representation of how they are in relationships? Do I need to help them see how unmanageable that is for them to express in life in the way that they are doing, so on and so forth? But that's not what I'm hearing from you. What I'm hearing from you is you're going, I don't feel satisfied by where we're getting, and I'm feeling like I'm struggling within this relationship. And as opposed to the practitioner going, let's explore that a little bit. You know, does this reflect other relationships in your life? Because that's what I want to know. Because it could be this is just with no experience whatsoever of your case. So I don't know, but I'm just going to throw it as an example. I'm not saying this is about you. But it could be that what's going on is that you are like that in relationships, right? It could be that in relationships, you end up doing things and saying things and acting in ways that make people wish to reject you. I'm not saying that's the case. I'm saying it could be. My job as a practitioner is to help you safely navigate that without making you feel abandoned. So I'm going to help you recognize that some of the ways that you speak or some of the problems that you have within our relationship and connection, maybe that's a direct reflection of how you are in other relationships. And I'm going to safely help you navigate that. And I'm not going to make you feel rejected because that will compound those feelings and we won't work in the therapy, you'll leave and it'll all go wrong. And that would be useful, wouldn't it, if we could kind of work it through that way. It feels like maybe there is a part of your practitioner who is trying to do that a little bit because they're not saying, I don't want you to come back to therapy. They're keeping you in the room, and at the same time, they're potentially trying to, in a way that isn't really resonating with you, get you to think about the impact you may have on them, but so you can see from another person's perspective how you might make other people feel in relationships where you can be rejected. Now, again, I don't know the situation. I'm not in the therapy with you. It may be that you've just got a practitioner who doesn't know how to deal with criticism, right? They might not know how to deal with criticism. But it could be worth going back and saying, I'm struggling right now because I feel Like I'm not making the connection that I need for us to move through this progress. And right now I feel like when you tell me that my feelings are getting in the way, or when you're saying you feel criticized, I feel that I have to protect your feelings. And so I withdraw from having the conversation. I withdraw from talking about what I need to talk about. And they may then respond to you and say, what I see is that if I feel criticized by you as a client, how is it when you're in a relationship with a partner? How is it when you're in a relationship with a friend? How do they feel? Is it that these feelings, when you're starting to get close to somebody, resort to you criticizing the individual because you're not getting what you want, when life isn't all about getting what you want? So again, this is just me playing out potentials, but that could also be what they're trying to do, which is to say, hey, you know what? One of the things about life is it's really unfair in the fact that people are unpredictable and they do things like reject us, or they don't like what we say, or when we really want them to do something, they do something completely different. And if we don't know how to regulate our feelings with that, we can get angry and we can say things that are regretful. And then they can cause big problems in our relationships. So it could just be there is a clumsiness about projecting that. And so that's what I would go back and say. I'd be like, I feel like when we're having this conversation, you're actually telling me I'm criticizing you and it's upsetting you, and I feel like now I'm responsible for my therapist's feelings. And they may be able to say, hey, that's not what I'm doing. I'm saying, what if when you express yourself, you don't see that the person who's meant to be in a friendship or meant to be in a partnership with you is feeling that you are criticizing them? Is this how it's playing out? Sorry if that sounded more like a supervision session therapeutically, but as I'm not in there and I don't really know the ins and outs, that's how I would approach it from those angles, right? Again, always come down to the caveat of this. It could just be they're not that great and it's not necessarily a therapeutic relationship that's going to inspire you. However, the vast majority of practitioners who are working, they are good at what they do. They might not connect with you as much as you would wish them to, because we're all different. We all get on with different people differently, better, worse. But it's probably still worth being there and just working at it. Just being like, ooh, life is full of people that I don't really connect with. And you might be one of them, Mr. or Mrs. Therapist. So I'm going to work at it anyway. Because then, if I can figure this out, even though it's not perfect, even though I'm dealing with probably a traumatized experience because of the EUPD, I'm imagining that comes from trauma, and it makes it very uncomfortable when you don't feel that you feel like you just want to run because you don't want to be the person who's getting alienated or abandoned or is getting it wrong. It can be helpful to stick in those situations because they can be the most powerfully moving ones, where you just go, oh, this is really uncomfortable. I'm not liking this. Just do it anyway and see what comes from it. That's what I'd say. Emma, how does a child of 11 years old handle bullying at school, and how do we as parents handle it? First off, really good that you know. Most parents don't know if the kids are being bullied. So if you are aware that your child is being bullied because they're coming and having that conversation with you, well, that's an excellent sign, and it clearly means that you have great communication skills between parent and child. So be aware of that. That's powerful. Secondly, I'm a big believer that you don't leave it. I mean, there are different schools of thought on this. Personally, early intervention, shutting those bullies down, that's what needs to happen. The reason for that is I don't believe all this stuff about, you know what, bullies are just really sad people who just need to bully people because they're being bullied at home. It's not what the research says. The research clearly doesn't say that. It says that they tend to have a superior attitude and believe they're better than other human beings. So unless they have some consequential responses to their behaviours, they're going to fundamentally carry them on. So I would work with your daughter on one level, work with the school on another. So we'll put your daughter to the side for a minute. There you go, 11-year-old, you're very safe there. Go to the school, speak to them. They should have an anti-bullying policy of some sorts. It won't be called that anymore. It's what I used to be involved with many years ago. But the point is, they've probably got a different name for it now. Equality and diversity and I don't know, how not to offend policy. They've probably got something like that there. You need to make sure that they are able to communicate what that is, because that's where you start. And it's brilliant, because as soon as you've got that, you're like, failing here, 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 and here. Now, that's really important. You want them to show you what their anti-discrimination, anti-bullying, whatever it is, policy is, and you want to see what they themselves have written down, because that's your starting point. So I would get in contact with the school, if it's a primary school or a high school. She's 11, I don't know which one it is, or he's 11, I don't know which one it is. Call them, say you want a copy of it. They might say they've sent it to you at some point 100 years ago, where we've lost it with the lunches that we also lost, like I did when I was getting my stuff to school. I never ever got anything out of the lunch boxes. Is it just me as a parent? Literally never. Didn't know anything when I was a mum to 2 little boys. Didn't even turn up to a lot of the things that I was meant to, because they used to put the letters in the lunchbox. Who does that? They had a bag. That's all I'm saying. Just one of those. I used to just empty it in the bin. It's a lot of disposable stuff when I was younger. So yeah, make sure that you get that. And then secondly, after you've got that noted down, and you can arguably say to them that you want her to have some special attention, for her to have a safe place to go at school, for her to have a buddy. Like, is there a buddy system, a mentor system? A lot of schools will have. If it's a primary school, there's not going to be older kids. If it's a secondary school, there will be, who can come and look after her, mentor her, hang out with her. You want to create like a foundation support around that child. I keep saying her, it could be a him as well. The other thing you want to do with your child is this. You can't stop bullies from having that nasty attitude. You can't, because that's who they are. It works for them until something changes, which is why I'm saying about the school managing it. You can't change it, because they've had reinforcement of feedback from the world. It's worked for them for a period. It's why bullies grow up to be horrible managers. Why bullies grow up to be people in relationships who bully partners, because they don't get the feedback that they're going to get to tell them to stop. So that's why getting the bullies sorted out at this age is kind of helpful to society, to your child, but also to the school and their future, because in the end, nobody really likes being around those kind of people, and they won't have the great relationships that anybody deserves in life. So you've kind of boxed that off by speaking to the school, get them to tell you exactly what's going to change and how they're going to transition this situation. But with your child, it's all about assertiveness. It really wouldn't matter. The only way you could bully me is if you were physically dominating me. I'm the first person to say that, look, I always think I can punch hard. My kids get me to punch them in the arm for fun. Yeah, because they say I'm so weak. Like, I know I am not going to be able to take on pretty much the majority of human beings in a fight. Simple as that. So you can physically dominate me. So you could bully me that way, right? But you have not got a hope of bullying me elsewhere. You know, the trolls try online. People tried in my past. It doesn't matter. Workers have tried, you know. It's one of those things. Organisations, professional bodies, they've tried. Doesn't work. I don't care, because I'm assertive enough to know that life is a blink of an eye, and just because that person thinks that about you, or that person says that about you, it doesn't actually change the way that I feel, right? I am lucky, and a lot of you out there will be listening and going, yeah, that's how I am. But that begins in assertiveness work. I wasn't when I was a kid. I was massively anxious, massively shy. It comes from working on confidence. And genuinely, there are a few things that evidentially show us impact when it comes down to improving assertiveness in children. Group sports. Get them involved in a group sport. Rugby, football, whatever. Rounders. Get them involved in something like martial arts. Teach them defensiveness. Let them know that they can handle themselves. Believe me, a kid who thinks that they can handle themselves physically, they're not going to handle themselves physically, but bet your bottom dollar it's going to change the way they walk, the way they talk, the way they hold themselves, because they're thinking in their head, mate, you come near me and I will drop kick you. And that stops them from ever getting in those situations, because they give off this air, and it's an air of confidence. There's just something powerful about people who can do that, and it teaches them how to communicate in a different way. My dad used to say to me when I was a kid, you know, the biggest thing that you can use to get out of any situation is your mouth. You can talk your way out of any situation, and he's absolutely right. And realistically, it came from a confidence, because I was really sporty, and I used to think, you know, like, there's a different way that you interact with the world where you're physically sure of yourself. So look at her or him doing that as well. Get them involved. And also, finally, know that kids that get bullied tend to have more of a sensitive temperament, like I did when I was a kid. Sensitive temperaments are not bad at all. Sensitive, shy, nervous, angsty children, it's quite difficult to watch them struggle. But remember that academically they tend to do better. They tend to be empathic, compassionate, loving. They're not bad traits to have. And it's the checks and balances in life, isn't it? It's the checks and balances. You take a look at who they are as a whole, and you go, oh, well, ideally, it would be great if they could have more of this, but actually they'd have to lose some of that. So when you look at your child as a whole, I get you wouldn't change your child, would you? So all you're going to do is you're going to fine tune the emotional vocabulary they have, and you do that through confidence work. And like I said, get the school on board. Bullying should be taken really seriously. Bullying, why do we call it bullying? It's usually like physical intimidation and threat, isn't it? Threat. It's threatening, physical intimidation. Sometimes it's physical abuse. Sometimes it involves stealing and coercion. It's horrible. I worry about my son getting sick all the time. How can I help my anxiety over it? He starts preschool soon, and it's stressing me out about him getting poorly. There's a spectrum of that. And again, I'm not here to diagnose at all, but you have to think about where you are on that spectrum. Because on one level, anxiety in mums and dads, totally normal. When a child is transitioning to a new stage, anxiety, totally normal. Sometimes if you have quite a sensitive temperament and you have an anxiety level and you start projecting that onto things like health, we might start touching the health anxiety spectrum. And of course, if it's debilitating to the point where it's making you catastrophize and be terrified and not want your child to go anywhere, then we're probably looking at something a bit more severe and also needing some attention. And that's really important, because you know exactly where you are. I don't know. You could just be like, oh my God, my son could get sick at preschool. He could get really poorly. I'm really scared about that. I'm going to send him. I'll probably get used to it. It's going to be a bit worrying for me, but you know, I'm going to get him there, right? And that, on one level, if it's there, and you're kind of just on that tentative spectrum, chances are with exposure work, it's going to be okay. And you don't have to do exposure work in therapy, although it's very helpful, because you're actually going to be doing it in reality. You're going to take your child, you're going to drop him off, you're going to watch him thrive. And as you watch him thrive, you're going to be like, I'm really glad that he's going to nursery. Really glad he's going to preschool, whichever it is. And if he gets sick and he comes home, he'll get well. And then again, you'll be exposed to that. It will build your confidence and you will feel more at peace with that. However, you've had 2 years of secondary traumatization. Like I said, we often think that we haven't changed our behaviours too much because we just adapt. And most of us will think about what it was like when they unnecessarily locked us down and sanctioned us in ways that is reprehensible and has destroyed a lot of kids' lives, as far as I'm concerned, and increased poverty. We won't go there any further. But we can look at that and we can say, well, it's gone back to normal now nearly. We're kind of getting back to our groove. But that's like me thinking that I've not been impacted. And yet today, like I said, I was meant to be at an appointment in Glasgow and I didn't go because I just thought everything was virtual now. So I can think on a subliminal level, so I can think on a conscious level, I haven't been affected and impacted. But on a subliminal level, my whole behaviour has changed. My outlook has changed. Every single one of us has had that. If you're listening to this now, unless you happen to be under a rock for the last 2 years, you have been to some degree traumatized and your behaviors have changed and shifted. And that means that if you've got a child that's potentially been very little or wasn't even here when it all began and you're about to just hand them over, you're dealing with a whole heap of that trauma. And it's turned the volume up on protection. Listen, you had the Behavioural Insights Unit, the government's nudge unit, trying to make you terrified, and they did a great job. And then you probably have been bringing up the most precious thing that you've ever had any contact with, which is your child, and you just want to treat them like glass because you don't want anything bad to ever happen to them. And you've had this bubble wrap of time where you felt very keyed into that, and now you're expected to unbubble wrap them and then just like hand them over. And there's a part of you that's like, ooh, that feels like a really big step to take. That is a big transition, and I don't know where I am with that. And the focus on health, well, let's be honest, on a logic level, well, if you're going to have an anxiety after 2 years of being told all those negative things, albeit that haven't literally played out, the point is you still have it in your head, the conditioning. So it's a gradual exposure yourself to this new circumstance that's going to help to alleviate that. I guess, how do you manage it? Well, different ways. Like I said, be aware of what I said at the very beginning as well. It could be that you do need to go and speak to somebody a few times to just kind of work through the health anxiety that you're feeling. It might be projected onto your son at the moment, but it's obviously come from something deep-rooted and a fear that's in there, an anxiety that's in there. Maybe you do need to have a conversation with somebody like your GP to talk about whether it needs a little bit more attention. But for the most part, you could even work with the nursery or preschool and just say, gradually do it. Okay, drop them off for half an hour one day, drop them off for an hour the next day. Do something that builds in to this sense of, I'm in control, my child is okay. Get your confidence up, and when you're ready to leave them fully, you'll have done that work towards it. The other thing, of course, is, well, even when I'm allowing that to occur, what if my child gets sick? But you're approaching that perception now, and you can't do that. So what you need to do is take a step back from assuming how you're going to be if your child gets ill at preschool, because you're only doing that from a position right now where you haven't started him. So you can't actually equate how that reaction will be. You can imagine in your head, oh my God, it'll be the worst thing in the world, but you can't, because you haven't gradiented him into school. You've not got him to a place where he's actually being looked after by other people. In the first few weeks, then you can start saying, all right, how do I feel now about if he gets ill? That's something to come back with. But for the initial part, like I said, maybe acknowledge that you can do it on a gradual basis and take it just step by step, day by day. Because that exposure, just like we do in therapy, is going to happen gradually as you get used to him going. And then hopefully all those feelings that you've got will alleviate. And if they don't, you can then think about that next stage of it, which is, now I'm still scared of him getting sick, right? And bear in mind as well, for every mother and father who's listening to this right now, it's a very natural fear to be afraid that your kid could get sick, because your happiness is inextricably linked to theirs, and their survival is far more important to you than your survival. Everybody who's a parent will be watching this going, if you could tell me that I could lie down and die today, and in exchange for my death, my kids would live the happiest, healthiest, longest, most wonderful lives in the world, we'd all be laid down. Seriously. That's how much the average parent loves their child. So it's okay that you have these feelings of protection and nurture and value. It's normal. It's just the volume switch is too high. You don't want to turn it all the way down, because obviously you want to care for your kid, but you just want to turn it down a little bit. And that will happen with exposure work. And if it doesn't turn down, then you come back here and we'll talk about next stages. Okay. I've been diagnosed with BPD. Can you talk about it as I'm worried? So borderline personality disorder. I don't know what you're worried about specifically. I'm going to imagine that you're worried about the fact that you now have a diagnosis, and it's like, oh, what does that mean? What does it mean? Somebody said you're BPD, you've got borderline personality disorder, and you're like, okay, well, I'm exactly the same person as I was 10 minutes ago, but now I'm this person with a BPD assumed and assigned. So there are stereotypical values to that classification that you can give. And I'm talking in stereotypes because of the fact that everybody's experience of the world is subjective. So we can talk about common traits, right? We can talk about that. But that doesn't mean that you will fit that paradigm. And it doesn't mean that your classification has been given to you based on some of the things that I'm going to talk about now. My experience of BPD, caveat, the experience I've had with clients in the past has been that some of my most profoundly spontaneous, joyful, interesting, curious, and really lovely human being clients that I've incurred in my work have been BPD. Either they were prior to me working with them, or during working with them they got assessed and became known as that. And pretty much every single, well, actually I think I'd be lying if I didn't say every single person that I've ever worked with BPD had trauma in their past. So as opposed to me believing, and this is my own opinion, though there's many who agree with me, but it's my own opinion, I believe that unlike how there used to be this fixed state that many would classify people as, like, this is what you are, I don't believe things like that in all cases, or in many cases. So with BPD, it's like, what trauma resolve is going to occur for you? Now you know there's BPD, as far as somebody said to you, your clinical psychologist, your psychiatrist has said, as far as we're concerned, borderline personality disorder is where you fit. What's happening next is the big question. Like, having that knowledge, like, how is that going to now help you to move through this scenario, to progress it? And arguably, the reason I ask about trauma is if you've experienced trauma and therefore you struggle to regulate your emotions at times, then it can be really helpful to start doing some trauma work, such as schema therapy. That would be great, because often, and again, it's a stereotype, often people who've experienced things like trauma, abandonment, primary attachment issues with like a good caregiver, who have felt a level of abuse in their lives, have felt that the people who are meant to take care of them just failed to meet their needs, and through childhood therefore struggled with feelings like being desperately afraid or neglected or were abused. Well, a child has very little control over their environment, and it makes sense that they create this, shall we say, overprotective response to the world around them when they get older, because they're so afraid of being placed in circumstances that felt so unsafe as they experienced when they were younger. Therefore, when they are triggered, or when they're placed in scenarios which feel very uncertain or upsetting or challenging, it can cause a bigger reaction than others may consider appropriate, which then can feed back problems in personal relationships. Also at times, not everyone at all, but at times with that classification, there can be an unpredictability, there can be a spontaneity that's not necessarily positive, such as in loving relationships, there may be a propensity to not remain faithful, but that's not because you don't love your partner, it's because you have such deep insecurities about the self, or you have a low value of the self, that maybe you don't have a worthiness about what you deserve. These are all things that can play into this. And the most important thing is to not see fundamentally those variables I've described, those traits I've described, as being an absolute. They're not. Every single person who has any kind of disorder or any classification is different from the one next to them. So it's more about saying, okay, now I have all this knowledge now, I can be equipped with all of this, you can go online and read about it, there'll be loads and loads of things about it. But you don't want to become something because it exists in a list. You know, you don't want to become it. You don't be like, okay, well, I don't fit all of that, but maybe that is me, I'm now that, so I've just got to accept that this is it. It's not an ultimatum, it's not an absolute. There are things that you can do and change. Like, the most important thing is to be like, okay, maybe this is about the child in me who got really let down. And instead of like beating them up and saying that, wow, look at you, you got us to adulthood and now I'm BPD. Like, that's not how you should see it. You should be like, okay, that makes sense. There were things that happened to me when I was a kid. Like, I wasn't safe. And that child didn't have a way of knowing how to protect themselves, so it created this really overprotective mechanism. And I'm an adult now, and it's not easy, but I get it. I get the fact that that little child They were just doing the best. They figured being overprotective and very reactive and very defensive was a way of keeping themselves safe, and that is good enough for a kid to do. And now you're an adult, you don't need that kid driving that car. You need to let them be the passenger, you'll move into the driving seat. It's about empowering yourself now with what you need to know to transition through some of these challenges and to become the human being that you are destined to become. Don't get hooked up on the word BPD. No one should get hooked up on any classification, because 200 years ago, you wouldn't have had them, right? There are classifications all the time that just appear and then change a bit. Like DID, dissociative identity disorder, that was a different name ages ago and that's shifted and changed. Or factitious disorder, which is Munchausen's. These are all things that change and grow. So don't get hooked up on that. Be more like, okay, this is what some people think. And there are some elements of that I kind of connect with, but it's not defining me. You're you. And whatever it is that you're going through now, whatever it is that it's triggered in your head, knowing this classification, let's say, what am I learning? That's the key question for everybody in life. It's like, what am I learning? What is this here to serve a purpose for me? And then you get that and you grow that. And from that, good things happen. You know what? Out of all of life, and all of us are going to go through this, truthfully, you learn nothing in the good times. It's not that we wouldn't like the good times a lot. Sure, who wouldn't want to win £168 million on the Euro Millions? It'd be cool. I mean, you'd only get a lift in happiness for about 6 to 12 months, and then you'd just be who you were before, but you'd just be rich, which obviously would make it a little bit easier when you needed to hire the yacht. But what I'm trying to get across is you wouldn't really learn very much. Grief, loss, being dumped, being abused, being in pain, all awful. All of it's awful. But it's also substantial in the lessons. When you meet people who are really wise, people who are really wise, and they'll speak and they'll profoundly connect with you. And there are a lot of public speakers and they sound like, they're having a good chat and they've got some good points, but they don't resonate. You don't look at them and think, man, you've been somewhere in that depth, somewhere in that pain. There's something really, really authentic in what you're exchanging with me. They're very few and far between, those kind of people. When you find them, the substantial experiences this person has been through something big and hard and painful and sad and exhausting, and they have scrabbled their way out of it. And in doing so, they've created something pretty damn amazing. It comes from darkness and sadness and loss and tragedy. All of those things, they illuminate a path that only those lucky enough to be able to reflect in a way where they don't sink and instead they swim can really feel value from even the darkest of territories they've inhabited. That is what I think we should all do with our pain. Most human beings, when you see it like that, it's like, even in the worst moments, it's like, okay, what am I learning now? And that's not to say that you wouldn't say, hey, I'd rather have the 168 million. It's just, don't lose sight of that negative experience having an incredibly positive outcome eventually. And it doesn't betray the things that you wish you still had. It just gives meaning to not having them. And on that note, chaps, if you fancy coming to my crime thing on Wednesday, sounds like I'm doing. If you fancy coming to a crime thing on Wednesday, I'm doing a bit of an armed robbery, hanging out locally, robbing cars. I'm not really. Next minute, that'll be sent somewhere, won't it? Emma Kenny, admitting she's only been doing the NSC. What's that, a bank? HSBC. That's a bank. TSB, that's a bank. I don't know why I now need to do Halifax, that's a bank. Anyway, what I'm getting across, if you want to join me for my live chats on my premiere on my crime channel on YouTube, do. Why not? Mental health to crime, it's all same kind of linearity. Otherwise, I'll see you next Monday, chaps, and keep going. Much love.